Yoruba Oba in Ibadan, ruling under centuries of established constitutional tradition, was now nominally part of the same colonial structure as a Tiv community in the Middle Belt that had never been ruled by a king at all. The north was governed through indirect rule, the existing emirate structure largely left intact, British officers working through the emirs, Islamic law preserved in many civil matters, Western education deliberately limited to avoid disrupting the existing social order. The South was governed very differently. Direct British administration, much heavier missionary involvement, far greater investment in Western-style education, and a colonial economy that increasingly required skilled clerks, teachers, and administrators, jobs that disproportionately went to Southerners and disproportionately to the Igbo, who threw themselves into Western education with extraordinary energy. This single decision, different governance models for North and South, created a structural imbalance that would shape Nigerian politics for the rest of the century. The North developed strong traditional political structures but lagged in Western education. The South, particularly the Southeast, developed weaker traditional centralized structures but raced ahead in literacy, professional training, and exposure to Western administrative systems. Britain had not created one country. It had created two different colonial projects, stapled together under one name, each developing in a different direction, each accumulating different grievances, each building toward a collision that nobody in London in 1914 seemed remotely concerned about. The Igbo position, the amalgamation created a particular kind of vulnerability that would matter enormously decades later. Without a unified pre-colonial kingdom of their own, the Igbo entered the colonial and post-colonial era as a population without the kind of centralized traditional political infrastructure that the Hausa Fulani Emirate system or the Yoruba Oba system provided. Igbo political identity was famously, fiercely local, loyalty to one's village, one's clan, one's town union, rather than to a broader Igbo nation in the way Yoruba or Hausa Fulani identity functioned. This meant that as Nigeria moved toward independence and regional politics began to calcify into the northern region, the western region, and the eastern region, with the eastern region becoming the political vehicle for Igbo interests. The Igbo found themselves represented through a relatively new and somewhat artificial regional structure, rather than through deep traditional institutions with centuries of established legitimacy. At the same time, the very qualities that had made the Igbo stateless and consensus-driven at home translated, under colonialism, into extraordinary individual ambition, freed from rigid hereditary hierarchy, with no tradition that political and economic opportunity belonged only to royal bloodlines. Igbo individuals pursued Western education and professional advancement with remarkable intensity. By the mid-20th century, Igbo civil servants, teachers, doctors, and merchants had spread throughout Nigeria, including deep into the north and west, in numbers disproportionate to the Igbo share of the national population. This success would become, within a few short decades, a source of profound resentment in other regions, and that resentment would have consequences far beyond economics. Part 3. A Flag Without a Nation. Nigeria gained independence on October 1st, 1960. The Union Jack came down over Lagos. The green and white flag rose in its place. There were celebrations. There was genuine hope. But independence did not resolve the contradiction Britain had built into the country's foundation. It simply handed that contradiction to Nigerians themselves and asked them to govern it. The new Nigerian constitution organized the country into three large regions, each dominated by one of the three major ethnic groups. The northern region, dominated by the Hausa Fulani, the western region, dominated by the Yoruba, and the eastern region, dominated by the Igbo. This structure immediately encoded ethnic competition into the heart of national politics. Elections were not primarily contests of ideas or policy. They were regional and ethnic headcounts. The national census, meant to be a neutral demographic tool, became one of the most explosively contested political instruments in the country's history, because whichever region could claim the largest population could claim the largest share of federal seats, federal revenue, and federal power. The 1962-63 census crisis nearly broke the federation before the decade was even over. Competing population figures were released, disputed, revised, and disputed again, each revision shifting the balance of political power between the regions. Trust between the regional governments collapsed further, with every cycle. Beneath the surface, a deeper and more dangerous resentment was building specifically around the Igbo presence throughout the rest of the country. Igbo civil servants administered colonial bureaucracy in the north. Igbo traders dominated commerce in northern cities like Kano and Kaduna. Igbo teachers staffed schools across regions that had not yet built their own professional class at the same pace. To many in the north, this presence felt less like neighborly cooperation and more like quiet economic colonization. A perception, fair or not, that Southern, and specifically Igbo, success was happening at the expense of Northern opportunity. This resentment did not stay beneath the surface for long.
We do not want them here! This is our city! Go away! Kupita! Kupita!
The first coup. On January 15, 1966, a group of mostly Igbo army officers staged Nigeria's first military coup. They assassinated the Prime Minister, Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, a northerner, along with the Premier of the Northern Region, Ahmadu Bello, and the Premier of the Western Region, Samuel Akintola. The coup plotters claimed they were acting against corruption and to save the nation from political collapse. But the ethnic optics were impossible to ignore. Igbo officers had killed the North's most prominent political leader and the West's most prominent political leader, while the coup's immediate beneficiary was an Igbo general, Johnson Aguiyi-Ironsi, who became head of state in the aftermath. Ironsi's brief government made a fateful decision in May 1966, issuing Unification Decree No. 34, which abolished the regional structure and replaced it with a unitary system of centralized government. To northern political and military figures, already suspicious that the January coup had been an Igbo power grab, this decree looked like confirmation, an attempt to erase regional autonomy and impose centralized Igbo-dominated control over the entire country. Whether or not that was Ironsi's actual intent, the perception was catastrophic. The Pogroms aim. In the months following the January coup, anti-Igbo violence began breaking out across northern Nigeria. What started as scattered attacks escalated dramatically after a second counter-coup in July 1966, in which northern officers seized power and installed Yakubu Gowon as head of state. Between May and October of 1966, organized massacres of Igbo civilians swept through northern cities. In Kano, in Kaduna, in Jos, and elsewhere, mobs, in some documented cases assisted or tolerated by local security forces, attacked Igbo communities with horrifying violence. Homes were burned, businesses were destroyed, men, women, and children were killed in the streets, in markets, on trains attempting to flee south. Estimates of the death toll from these pogroms range from 10,000 to as high as 30,000 Igbo civilians killed over the course of several months. An additional 1 to 2 million Igbo people fled the north entirely, abandoning homes, businesses, and decades of life built outside their ancestral region, streaming back into the eastern region in a mass exodus that overwhelmed the area's capacity to absorb them. For the Igbo population living through this, the message was unmistakable and final. They had tried to build lives across the entirety of the country Britain had created. They had educated themselves, worked, traded, and integrated into every region of the Federation. And in 1966, large parts of that federation answered with mass killing. The federal government in Lagos, now controlled by Gowon, struggled to control the violence and, in the eyes of many Igbo survivors, failed to adequately protect them or hold the perpetrators meaningfully accountable. Trust between the Eastern region and the rest of the Federation did not simply erode after 1966. It collapsed entirely.
This is
Part 4.
We must go.
The Declaration. In the aftermath of the pogroms, the military governor of the Eastern region, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu, found himself leading a population that no longer believed the Nigerian Federation could guarantee their basic physical safety. Throughout late 1966 and into 1967, attempts were made to negotiate a way forward. The most significant of these was the Aburi Accord, agreed in Ghana in January 1967, in which Gowon and Ojukwu, along with other regional leaders, agreed in principle to a looser, more confederal structure for Nigeria, one that would have granted the region significantly more autonomy. Gowon's government, upon returning to Nigeria, did not implement the Aburi Accord as agreed. To Ojukwu and the Eastern region's leadership, This was the final proof that the federal government could not be trusted to honor agreements, let alone protect Igbo lives. On May 30th, 1967, Lieutenant Colonel Ojukwu stood before the Eastern Region's Consultative Assembly and declared the independence of the Republic of Biafra, a new sovereign nation encompassing the Eastern region, built explicitly as a homeland where the Igbo and other minority ethnic groups in the region would never again be vulnerable to the violence they had just survived. The new nation took its name from the Bight of Biafra, the body of water along its coastline. Its flag bore a rising sun, a symbol of new beginning. Its founders believed with genuine conviction that they were not committing an act of rebellion, but securing the only guarantee of safety available to them after the events of 1966.
At the end of Part 2, a flag rose. In Part 3, watch what it cost.